Exorcism is not a field solely rooted in the metaphysical or the supernatural. It is also intimately human. It is the crossroads between human lives and deep, ancient darkness, which lurks in the oldest roots of creation. We stand in a perpetual fray between these two worlds, in places carved out by magnificent and heinous actions before history was even written. Even the lasting knowledge and imprint of these events left on the human soul could not be expressed in its fullness, coming instead through epic tales written by ancient man at the edge of history, tales of the diverse goodness of creation, the temptation for us to place ourselves in a fundamentally unattainable station, and great cosmic warfare which span the divisions and borders of reality. The inquiry into these first principles is, in the end, the study of only one thing: evil. Evil does not sleep. It is always brooding, always lurking in the dark. It may lie undisturbed for ages, but it does not sleep. It waits, patiently and dutifully. Our duty, a charge we accept freely, is to take action when it finally strikes. There are rules governing its actions, fundamental principles built into reality. Over time, we come to know and understand them, at least on some level, but they still remain mysterious. We see through a glass, darkly. One truth, perhaps the most persistent, is that evil cannot abide someone to peer into its depths, and yet continue to live outside its grasp. Many people can be clutched tightly and pulled in, losing themselves to the abyss. Fair game. Others, however, have to be let in. Such a person may be greatly impacted by evil, even move into a whirlpool of its influence after witnessing it. But so long as they live without being fully in its grasp, they are a liability, one with more power than they realize. When Ezra witnessed the murder of her parents at such a young age, a murder put into action by a man who was supposed to be a successor to the apostles, and committed by a man who was supposed to represent justice and safety, it ripped her worldview apart and placed her in the slow whirlpool of evil's grasp. She forsook her faith, her friends, and anything which reminded her of her life which had been torn away from her. Yet her soul, still indelibly marked, sought spiritual life in some way. She fed it with whatever seemed opportune or available, catering to the lifestyle of the perpetual spiritualist, seeker. She changed her name, burned her bridges, and began to live a different life. Yet, even as a woman named Lavender fell deeper into a violent maelstrom, that indelible mark, a soul which CK had named Ezra in the waters of baptism, resisted and fought. She could not be pulled in directly, only edged closer to the abyss. Evil knew the liability at hand, were Ezra to escape its clutches. Freeing herself of the yoke which had been placed upon her, her word and testimony would prevent untold numbers from possibly falling into the same fate. Even if her escape meant just one other person could be defended from the clutches of evil, that would be too much for it to abide. At a certain point, being stirred from its waiting, evil decided that the time had come to seal her fate. It could not pull her in, but it could wear her down. In small ways, and in great ways. Many of these things were explained by CK. As we all sat in enraptured silence in the baptistry, Others I had to infer after the fact. Still others I have realized over time. In that moment, however, only one realization cast itself over my mind. We need Ezra to be with us. CK spoke from the silence. I was jolted back, believing that he had somehow read my mind. Yes, I quietly replied. She's the target. We can't do anything without her. We both looked towards Bishop Joseph, still directing his worried look towards the baptismal font in the center of the room. Ezra sat downcast, listening but exhausted. The sun had ceased to light up the room, casting us all in muted shadow. As the last glow of light faded moment by moment, "I'm not Langford," he whispered, his gaze unmoving. "I don't know what else I can say. I'm not operating a criminal cabal under my belt. I'm not funneling money to mob cops. I just want..." He sat up, looking towards CK and I. His face was intent and serious. "I just want reassurance. I've never seen anything like this before. I've just learned to trust in God and the church. I believe. It's just difficult at times." "You have faith," CK spoke up. "Have faith in me too. If Harold has killed, if we need to take care of the demonic before we let someone take care of the criminal, my only worry is that mingling those goals will result in tragedy, even if you don't intend it." The bishop nodded slowly, standing up and walking over to the door. The baptistry was nearly shrouded in darkness. As he opened the door, the hazy light which still remained in the cathedral shone through and illuminated us. "I agree," he softly decided. "But there's more you need to know." CK's glance shot up. "Follow me, please." Bishop Joseph walked out, heading down the nave of the cathedral. CK begrudgingly stood, grabbing a bottle of holy water out of his cassock pocket, and sighing with a slight frustration. He waved Ezra and I on, following the bishop. "You okay?" I asked Ezra. She nodded, standing up and taking a deep breath. "Facing the maelstrom, Father Grey. So let's get it over with." She sprinted after CK, catching up with him as I followed. We were led to a door on the left transept of the cathedral. The hallway within it opened up into the offices of the chancery, which had long since closed for the night. Walking through the maze of offices to the back, we were greeted with another door, sturdier and older than the rest, bearing the diocesan seal above the words, "Bishop's Residence." Fetching a key from his pocket, Bishop Joseph opened the door to reveal a small vestibule, which opened up into a large ornate parlor. A white Baroque-covered ceiling sat above walls of blue and beige damask. Bookshelves and paintings adorned the room, providing a rich smell of biblosmia and antique mahogany. "Welcome to my borough home," the bishop said with a small smile. "A bit much for me, but she is lovely." He waved us through to an adjacent room. Looking over, I could see CK with his bottle of holy water, beelining to the corners of the room and sprinkling them. He ran off in another direction as Ezra and I followed the bishop into the adjacent room, containing a grand staircase and a large oak door leading to the street. In the distance, I could hear CK's shoes tapping through some distant rooms as he imparted a whirlwind blessing to the house Bishop Joseph led us to a final door on the other side of the staircase. It was smaller and more clearly lived in. The ceilings were the same decorated style, but the walls consisted entirely of built-in bookshelves. A few chairs sat in front of the desk and around the walls of the room. On a large desk in the center of the room, a faint lamp illuminated scattered books, ledgers, and a large PC. The sun had since gone down, leaving the lamp our only source of light. "Your office?" I inquired. "I like to think of it as more of a study," Bishop Joseph replied, walking behind his desk and thumbing through his drawer. "Easier to do the heavy lifting in here, and save the office work in the chancery for simpler duties." He pulled out a small folder and looked up quizzically at Ezra and I. "Where's Kelly?" Ezra cracked a smirk. "Reblessing your house, I believe," she said. "Kelly?" Bishop Joseph hollered. "In my study, Kelly." The pitter-patter of elderly footsteps suddenly became louder as a frazzled-looking CK walked in behind me, holding an almost empty bottle of holy water. As he caught his breath, "Right here, Your Excellency. Just finishing up." He flicked his bottle towards each corner of the room, exhausting the remainder of his water and tucking it back into his pocket. Bishop Joseph opened the folder in his hand, spreading out papers across his desk and waving us over to look. Photographs were paperclipped to 4 of them. They appeared to be mugshots. "When I heard your story, Ezra," the bishop began, "something stuck out to me. Something I couldn't quite place until I remembered a report from our homeless ministry. Catherine, she runs the ministry. She came to me about a week ago, mentioning that a few regulars had disappeared. Word on the street was that they had just disappeared, each on a different night. 4 women. The element of your story that struck me." He unclipped the 4 photographs, passing them to Ezra. Her hands began to tremble as she studied each picture. In an instant, she shoved them back into the bishop's hand. Walking over and collapsing into a chair, she leaned to the side, resting her head in her hand. Though upset, she seemed to have no tears left to cry. "It's them," she whispered. "The faces. The heads I saw on the altar. It's them." CK and I looked towards the bishop. He sat the pictures down and picked up the papers he had scattered on the desk. I reached out to Lorenzo, a parishioner who's a detective with the city PD. CK quickly frowned. I didn't give him any info about the case, the supernatural realm of it, at least. But I did ask him to acquire any information the PD had on any of these women. For better or for worse, they've each got a rap sheet. Prostitution charges mostly. You running a ministry or a prison pipeline? CK sharply inquired. A ministry, Bishop Joseph immediately retorted. I've asked Lorenzo and many other of my parishioners on the force to cut him a break. We try to provide them paths out of it, but at the end of the day, we just try to help them out practically. I'm not in the business of judging or punishing them. CK visibly relaxed a bit, giving a sober nod. I let Lorenzo know that I might have somebody with some information on their disappearance. The bishop continued, but I stressed it was only a possibility. He agreed to keep it under the wraps for now. But even if Harold is possessed, and he's the culprit in the first place. He's going to have to answer for this. I have to bring in Lorenzo sooner or later." CK nodded again, standing up to his full stature. "Delegate me to perform this task. I'll bring him back, if it is indeed him." Bishop Joseph thought for a moment. He seemed like a man caught between two duties: the spiritual care of a man who may very well be possessed, and the temporal duty to bring justice to a man who may also be a killer. "It's yours," he finally replied. "God be with you, and be careful." We immediately began planning. CK's mind seemed on fire, realizing everything we needed to do to prepare for this confrontation. A return to the rectory was first on his list. For supplies and much-needed rest, he needed to do research as well, putting the clues of our experiences into some discernible context. The bishop concurred with his ideas, slightly listening in as we concluded our short meeting. He finally saw us out the front door, thanking us for coming to see him. As soon as you learn more," he asked of us, "come and see me immediately." CK shot him a thumbs up, and a smile as he fetched his keys from his pocket. "You've got my word, Your Excellency." Bishop Joseph closed his door, waving us goodbye. The city lights illuminated us in a bright fluorescent glow as CK fetched his keys. "Ezra, you're with me. Gray, I trust you can follow us back without getting lost." I chuckled, pulling out my own keys. "I'll try not to tailgate you, CK." CK returned the laugh and led Ezra to his car. I walked a few paces up the street to where I had parked, and I tried to focus my mind as we began the journey back to the rectory. All the knowledge which CK had given me so far, in addition to the content of my lessons in Rome, had been very different from this current case we found ourselves in. It seemed that there was supposed to be a method to the madness, a pattern that was usually followed. Even the case which began this ordeal followed that order. So why was Harold so different? Harold seemed to be bridging a gap between infestation, oppression, obsession, and possession. Elements of each were present in the facts of the case, but there didn't seem to be any clues as to how they had grown. Harold was not a bedridden chasm of despair and anguish for those around him. He seemed to be active and mobile. He wasn't suffering from physical torment at the hands of demons, but seemed to be in some bizarre symbiosis with them. Had they infested him after the exorcism in the apartment? Had he somehow opened himself up? He seemed to admit to me before the exorcism that he was a non-believer. What purpose would demons have to infest him if he had no faith to destroy? Was all of this directed towards finally pulling Ezra into their grasp? A thought entered my mind, something which I was unable to shake no matter how hard I tried. What if CK is as lost as I am? I slowed down as the facade of St. Justin's came into view. Following CK's car around to our lot in the back, he exited the car with a brisk energy, opening the back door of the rectory for Ezra, and waving me through as I climbed out of my car. Come on, he ushered. "We have work to do." CK led us through the house, turning on the lights in the living room. He threw some logs and kindling into the fireplace as Ezra and I sat down. I recognized his energy in this instance, committed and ready. He had the authorization he needed, and now He was going to stop at nothing to fix this mess. After the fire had caught, he stood up, brushing off his hands as he walked to the bookshelf, looking through and pulling out a few different selections. The books appeared worn and aged. I could hardly make out any of the markings or words on them. He sat them down gently on the small round end table, beside his usual chair. "I have some reading to do." He sighed as he eased into his seat. "Ezra, you can take the guest room. It's just upstairs, across from my own room. Gray can show you. Both of you need sleep. I'm not sure when I'll wake you up, but be ready to go when I do." I stood up, suddenly realizing how exhausted I had become over the day. Ezra seemed to barely have the strength to walk up the stairs. Looking back as we ascended, I saw CK immediately flip open one of his books, scanning the pages with an academic ferocity. I ushered Ezra to the guest room, simply furnished but with a bed already made. "Thank you, Father," she quietly spoke, closing the door as soon as she entered. I made my way to my room and found it just the way I had left it this morning, a time which seemed like ages ago, given the day's events. I hung my cassock on the small coat rack next to the closet door, wrapping my collar rabat around it. I changed clothes, even putting on a new pair of socks to sleep in. I was going to be prepared as possible, firmly expecting CK to come in at any moment and tell me it was time to get to work. I glanced at my watch, noting the time was just past 8 o'clock. Grabbing my breviary from the bedside table, I prayed the short night hour. Compline to end the day. Et Jessum benedictum frunctum. Ventris tu. Nobis post hoc. O clemens o pe. O dulcis Virgo Maria. I laid down, being transported the moment I pulled the comforter up into the void of deep sleep. No dreams, no thoughts, just the timelessness of sleep's veil. No sense of any other reality. Suddenly, an acute awareness flooded over me. It was like the beginnings of a dream, when things are ever so slightly surreal. I was in no discernible place. Rather, it was more like a state. I felt fear welling up in me, hatred pressing in around me, a sense of doom and languish, which made me feel as if I were a prisoner bound in chains, unable to see anything, but keenly aware of some malevolent despair, the absence of any light, any goodness. Around me, I felt a growing, similar sensation. Something began to dance across my skin, giving short licks of a sensation both familiar and alien. What was it, I wondered? It was right there, just beyond my ability to recall. Flame. My senses shot to their fullness, losing any semblance of a dream. In pitch darkness, surrounded by the same sense of oppression, fear, and hatred, I suddenly became engulfed in the feeling of fire. I felt myself screaming, but no sound came to my ear, no strain in my throat. Everything was still, silent, peaceful. It was as if I could do nothing, as I was slowly consumed, reconstituted, and consumed again. Every part of me felt as if it were being destroyed and recreated in an unending immensity of torture. Endless death, unimaginable pain. Protect us, Lord, as we stay awake. Watch over us as we sleep. My mind could only go back to my earlier prayer, begging protection from whatever was assaulting me. That awake, we may keep watch with Christ. My mind felt as if it were slipping, giving into a sense of finality, falling into madness forcibly, accepting the permanency of this state, and to sleep rest in his peace. My eyes could see a wooden ceiling, my skin pouring sweat, could feel the comforter surrounding me. My ears heard my breath, hyperventilating in and out of my lungs. I was back. I was safe. Gray? I shot up in fear, the familiar voice coming from just beside me. Adrenaline ran through my veins as my heart pounded through my chest. Frantically looking around, I could see no other forms, revealed by the soft glow of lights from outside. Yet the feeling remained unshakable, that something had been there. Knock, knock. I screamed, jumping out of my bed in a state of desperate panic, as the bedroom door flung open. "What the hell is wrong with you?" CK yelled, jumping back from the open door in fright. He leaned himself against the doorframe, bracing and taking a few deep breaths. "CK," I frantically replied, running over to him. "I'm so sorry. I was having a thing." "Something, kid," he replied, standing back up and catching his breath. "You scared the hell out of me." He looked at my face curiously. I realized it must have been drenched in sweat. "Gray?" he quietly asked. "Did you have a visitation?" I nodded, still breathing heavily. Not as visual as earlier. Something else. A sense. He tapped his temple with 2 fingers. "Fortitude, Gray," he said, placing his hands on my shoulder in comfort. "It knows we're coming and it's lashing out. Don't let it wear you down." Down the hall, I heard a door creak open. Looking, I saw Ezra pensively glance down at us. "Everything okay?" she quietly asked. "Just fine," CK replied. "It's time to move out. Get ready, please. Wear something warm." Ezra nodded, shutting her door. CK turned and made his way towards his room. "I'm getting my supplies," he said back to me. "Bring your ritual, a surplice, and a stole. Dress warm. I'll explain the situation downstairs." I walked into my room and turned on the light, relishing in its mere existence for a moment. My heart had calmed down from the panic of my experience, and I was certainly wide awake. I buttoned my collar and threw on my cassock, looking through my closet for a warm coat to wear over it. I glanced at the time while putting on my shoes. Just past 2:30 in the morning. Outside my room, I could hear Ezra's door open and close. Then the sound of her walking down the stairs. I stood up, took a deep breath, and followed. CK stood in the living room by the fireplace, already vested in his surplice and taking in the last remnants of heat from the dying blaze. I smelled the faint aroma of coffee and turned to see Ezra walking out of the kitchen with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to me with a smile. "I'm not much of a coffee drinker, but Kelly made some for us too." I sat my coat and surplice on the chair nearest me and took the mug, relishing the first sip of energetic warmth. Kelly did the same, quickly slurping it down sip by sip. Around his chair, I could see dozens of books on the table and on the floor. Some opened and some closed. Has he been up all this time? I wondered, taking another sip. "So," I began, "what did you learn?" CK gulped the last of his coffee, taking a deep breath and setting his mug on the mantel. "It's not good," he replied, rubbing his hands together in thought for a moment. "Most of the recent manuals and texts speak the same way about accidental repossession. When the exorcised demon tries to infest someone else present at its exorcism, it's very uncommon, and it usually takes the same route, throwing the person into the same litany of symptoms as the previous possessed person." "But Harold isn't like that," I interjected. "Right. Something is different. I had to go back pretty far, digging and digging. I started seeing footnotes and citations about willing repossession, something I've never quite heard of before." I was surprised. CK of all people encountering something completely new. Luckily, I had one of the texts cited. It's a reprint of a medieval, demonological Enchiridion. Took me long enough just to read the damn text. God bless the poor blind monk who transcribed it. A willing repossession is analogous to an intentional conjuring, only after the fact. "So, summoning a demon?" I curiously asked, but Harold didn't even believe. Why would he try conjuring? "He didn't, kid. Hence, after the fact, one or more of the Legion, probably one, most likely the most powerful, moved on to Harold." He trailed off for a moment. "The thing about legions, Gray, is that they're loud. A chorus of damned angels, all seeking their destructive outlets. Like a symphony of screams, which can't discern anything. They're powerful, but they're also short-sighted. Most of the time, individual possession is just about deconstruction. But sometimes, you get a demon with some awareness, some sense. I think in this case, freed from the cacophony of the Legion, the demon became quickly aware of the potential to cause complete chaos." "Because of Ezra?" I asked. "No," Ezra quietly replied. "Not just because of me, because of Kelly, and because of you." My mind suddenly came back to Brandon's concerned warning for me the previous day. Father Kelly is going to do whatever it takes to keep her safe. He will absolutely not let it rest. He's experienced, he's knowledgeable, but he's also human. "Gray," CK began, "the demons know me. I told you that. They know my experience and my reputation, but over enough time they also learn your fears, your doubts. They know I blame myself for what happened to Matthew and Josephine. They know I blame myself for Ezra falling out of the faith." "Oh, Kelly," Ezra teared up, suddenly seeming to realize what he was saying. "Exactly," he interjected. "If they pull you in, they know it will pull me in. Fortitude be damned." He struggled for a moment, emotions flaring through his face. "If they pull me in, they think it's a clean shot to take care of you, Gray. 3 souls in perdition, 2 of them exorcists. They would risk a hell of a lot for it." "So, this demon," I tried to clarify, "it's aiming for this perfect storm of an opportunity, right? How is Harold involved in making it happen?" CK cleared his throat and continued explaining. "An intentional repossession means that at some point, Harold willingly accepted what was happening. He either realized that after the exorcism that he was possessed, or the demon slowly influenced him to seek out occult resources and darken his soul to the point that he thought he'd done it himself, unaware that the demons had been guiding him the whole time. Either way, the result is the same possession. Then comes the willingness. The demon isn't tormenting Harold. They seem to be operating together. It must have made some offer to him, some promise. The medieval Enchiridion says that the acceptance of this promise creates a relationship, a covenant. Then what about the content of Ezra's experience? The murdered woman in the blood altar? Ah yes, that's elsewhere, but clear as day. A 19th century occult manual describes the darker ways of conjuring. In this case, a soul for a soul. The soul of the woman? No. Their souls are free from all of this. They'll face God and make an account, as we all will. Only He knows what is to become of them. The soul being exchanged is Harold's. Each murder he willingly commits is a grievous, mortal sin. It cries out to heaven for vengeance. It fractures his soul, bringing him deeper into the clutches of the evil one. I sat down, my heart racing as I tried to take it all in. Each death, each fracture of his soul, allows another demon closer access to this world. Those are the figures you saw, Ezra. Hooded, animalistic. They were representations which your mind tried to put together. You're simply incapable of seeing what they truly are. The images you created are far more tolerable than the reality. They're what's waiting to be ushered into the world. But demons prowl the world already, CK. Why go through all of this? Demons prowl about, yes. But there is no order to it. No goal but general destruction. Most demons are just foot soldiers. They're like parasites, latching on when they see opportunity. They have limits though. Grace repels them. Even the simplest prayer can defeat them before they grow. These are more damned seraphim, cherubim, thrones, still raging with insolent fire from their immediate rebellion. These are summoned with intent to be placed onto something or someone through the use of black arts. Grace, prayer, all of these things can be circumnavigated in this instance, especially by a conjurer who is willingly possessed. With us out of the way, they could cause horrific desolation, spiritually and physically. I cannot say more. Gray. That is all I know. Only Harold can tell us more, and it's time he did so. The clock in the living room began to ring, plucking out the chimes. 3 o'clock. It's time, CK said, pulling a violet stole out of his pocket, kissing it, and placing it around his neck. He grabbed his small bag from behind the chair and double-checked the contents. I knew from experience what was inside. Books, sacramentals, crucifixes, holy water. We cannot find where he is hiding by any human means. This house, though it exists somewhere, is much more now. It is periphery, a liminal space between two worlds. We could stand before it, and it would be hidden from our earthly sight. We cannot use human skill or a black art to find it. God will show us a way to this battle. I stood up, vesting in my surplice, and pulling my own violet stole out of my pocket. Reda mihi domine, stolum, immortalitas, quam perdidi in pravicatione, primi, parentis, et quam vis, indigenis, acido ed tum, sacrum mysterium, morir te men gaudium, sempiterum. I kissed the stool and placed it over my neck, putting my coat on over it. Ezra had bundled up as well in a heavy hooded coat, a look of intensity on her face. "We'll walk," CK said, aimlessly, "wherever our feet take us, and we will pray." He pulled out his ritual, flipping to the back. "Saint Joseph is a powerful intercessor, Gray. We'll begin with his litany." I nodded, walking over and opening the door. As we exited the rectory, I noticed that the night was cool, though not at all frigid. The sky was clear, a few stars peeking through the lights. Not a soul was in sight. "Ezra," CK asked, "did he take you deeper into the city or further away?" "Further away, I think." CK nodded, walking down the pathway from the rectory and heading left down the sidewalk. Away from the city center, he began praying the litany, Ezra and I making muffled responses. "Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison, Christe audi nos, Christi exaudi nos." We walked at a steady pace, not paying attention to anything but our footing in the increasingly dark streets. CK took time between each invocation, spreading them out. "Sancte Joseph, ora pro nobis." In the distance, I could hear a car driving, though it was hidden from my sight. Businesses and buildings turned into houses in a neighborhood. Occasional streetlights and yard lights lit our path. The cool air, which had been manageable at first, took on a deeper chill after some time. "File de nutrical, ora pro nobis." A scattering noise came from alongside me, and my glance shot over. A small possum ran through a yard away from us. I heard a small hoot from a nearby tree. An owl. The sky grew darker, and the stars brighter. Beside me, I could see Ezra and her hands buried in her jacket pockets, her hood fully covering her head. The slightest mist blew out of her mouth with each breath. "Joseph Eastesteem, ora pro nobis." We turned our path, walking past blocks of different neighborhoods. As we came towards the top of a hill, I could see a suburban sprawl. Mountains grew in the distance, the faint light of a quarter moon hovering just over the horizon. I became suddenly cognizant of our distance, our location. I had never seen this neighborhood, and the hills didn't seem to make sense. Our area was relatively flat. A drive to the city seemed to have no change in elevation. "Exemplar opificum, ora pro nobis." We descended the hill, the sky growing darker with each step. The streetlights became fewer and fewer. I noticed a chill creep up my spine, and something seemed off. Ezra put her arm around mine, pulling herself closer. I could hear her voice quivering from the cold with each response she made. Looking at her, I noticed her breath seemed to mist slightly more than before. "Patron exilum, ora pro nobis." Looking above, I could see a cloud moving overhead, followed by a handful more. They began slowly obscuring the black, starry sky. I shot my gaze to my left, thinking I had seen something. A wisp of fog. "Patron morintium, ora pro nobis." I could see just below my vision, the sight of my own breath fogging up in the cold. I found myself uncomfortable, beginning to shiver. CK stalwartly marched forward. Terror demonum, ora pro nobis. From each side, it seemed as if a veil began to slowly descend. Clouds raised to cover the sky, completely blocking it out. Fog began to seep into our vision, rolling across homes and yards. Our breath was entirely visible, curling up before us in bulbous clouds. Angus Dei, Quitoles, Peccata Mundi, Parce Nobis, Domine. The road ahead disappeared, blanketed by the thick vapor which surrounded us. The only light came from a steady fluorescent haze which permeated it. Angus Dei, Quitoles, Peccata Mundi, Misere Nobis. Our sight became entirely blocked. CK, only a few steps ahead of us, was barely visible. We marched on, deeper into the oncoming fray. Constitutium, demonum demus, su, et principem omnes, possessionis su. CK stopped in his tracks, motioning for us to catch up and join him. As we stood together, surrounded by choking fog, he spoke. "We're here, Gray." He turned to his left, looking into the distance beyond the sidewalk. I followed his glance and saw it. A single house. It was still obscured by the fog, yet the structure seemed to permeate through it, as if it were existing in two worlds at the same time. Visible to my eyes and visible to my soul. There was nothing special about it. Nothing to set it apart from any other suburban home. Yet, at the same time, the sight filled me with a deep and unspeakable dread. I felt Ezra tighten her grip, pulling herself closer towards me. "That's it," she faintly whispered. "That's the house." CK bowed his head for a moment, muttering a short prayer under his breath, then turned to Ezra and I. "It's time we finished this." He turned again to the house, taking a step onto the property. "God help us."